struck. It is 7:02. I'll officially call the June 27th, 2018 work session to order. We'll let the minutes reflect that Councilman Quinn and Councilwoman Cole are absent this evening. We do have members of staff and our distinguished audience that are here with us this evening. We have the minutes of June 13th, 2018 before us, and would entertain a motion of approval for those minutes.
I'll move.
Second.
Moved, seconded. Any discussion on those minutes? All right, those in favor, aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, thank you, Lisa, as always, for that. We had covered our monthly reports last month. Everything is in for the month. We have no public hearings this evening. We have no guests this evening. We have one action item and one informational item, and then we'll start with the action item. This is the request for transfer of development rights, 1725 Scribner Road. And Mr. Costello, your name is attached to that.
It is.
We had a hearing back in April 18th, sticks in my mind. Since that meeting, any additional information or any additional items that you believe the board should be aware of since that public hearing?
We did table that matter. It was a public informational meeting, not a public hearing.
Thank you. Yep.
And we did table that matter to give the board and the town attorney time to review the documentation associated with the transfer of development rights as it relates to state law. We have received additional input from neighbors who have expressed concern for the proposal. And other than that, we really haven't had anything else of any great value to share with you.
All right, so board, any questions, comments for staff, or any other items that you believe you'd like to offer as part of the discussion?
I think I alluded at the information session that I really wasn't quite convinced that the request satisfied, what the applicant needed to show to sustain being able to have the transfer of development rights. So I did a little bit of research since then, just because I was curious as to what findings we might have to make, or what generally we'd have to consider with respect to the request to transfer development rights from the Crown Point subdivision to the subdivision off of Scribner Road. And I'll just read some things just for the record primarily, but also for my fellow board members. Right from Town Law 261-A Subdivision 2, this was helpful to me. The purpose of providing for transfer of development rights shall be to protect the natural, scenic, or agricultural qualities of open lands, to enhance sites and areas of special character or special historical, cultural, aesthetic, or economic interest or value, and to enable and encourage flexibility of design and careful management of land in recognition of land as a basic and valuable natural resource. So that, coupled with some additional research I looked at in terms of places where TDR has been used for things like preserving agricultural space, forests, historical sites. I think this affirmed for me that the request to have the development rights transferred just wasn't appropriate in the context in which we're looking at it. So I would not be supportive of granting the request to transfer development rights.
Okay. Other discussions or comments on that?
I concur with Councilwoman Metzler, listening to what the residents had to say, and I went back and watched the video of the meeting just to refresh my memory the other day. And it did seem like the residents were concerned about the 18 units if we went ahead and allowed this transfer of development rights. I know the town doesn't have much experience with that. Certainly I don't, not seeing it in my years here on the town board. And it's just not done a lot. And so I'd like to kind of keep different developments separated from each other and not commingle. And so going on what Councilwoman Metzler had to say and hearing some of the concerns from the residents about the 18 units and the transferred development rights, I'm in favor of not voting for this to move forward. So
I
I'll
would-
be voting against
Transfer of
this.
development rights.
Yes, thank you.
I would also add that what was also instructive to me was that the purpose behind the town law that affords transfer of development rights is that they talk in terms of a sending district and a receiving district. And in the request before us, the sending district would be Crown Point, the receiving district would be the parcel off of Scribner Road. And that the purpose of TDR is that development rights from the sending districts are located to the receiving district, thus allowing a municipality to achieve its preservation objectives for the lands in the sending districts. So if we take that one step further, if the spirit and intent behind the law, Town Law 261, is to have preservation objectives of some sort in a sending district, I don't see us having any preservation objectives in the parcel on Crown Point, such as open space or something like that. When you look at our land use maps in our comprehensive plan, that area is clearly zoned residential. There is nothing within our comprehensive plan that says that there is something that in the future should be saved there or preserved. So again, in that regard, I think this is also not appropriate for a transfer of development rights.
Okay. I think, some further discussions that this board has had in the past on this particular topic is that as part of an upcoming comprehensive plan review, certainly we can ask the committee to look at and make any thoughts or recommendations back to the board. However, because of the fact that there is nothing on the books today in our ordinance for transfer of development rights, and we have no designated areas, I think all the items that you cited leads us to the conclusion that transfer of development rights from Crown Point to this location here at 1725 Scribner Road is not appropriate. Before I call for a vote, I think it's important because we want to follow up with the developer on this and the discussion around the transfer of development rights. What I'd like to do is I'd ask Mr. Costello maybe to draft a letter, but before the letter goes out, I would ask that a copy be shared with the board so that the letter is reviewed by the board for just to make sure that everybody is on the same page with the fact that no transfer of development rights. Property is zoned, as Councilwoman Metzler indicated, residential R120, and that would look to develop that site consistent with the current zone.
Yeah, I would like to use your findings that you made.
Yes, so great.
in that line.
All right, it sounds like the board is unanimous with that. I would entertain a motion for denying the transfer of development rights at 1725 Scribner Road.
I will move.
I'll second.
Okay, it's been moved, seconded. Any further discussion around that? Again, this will be a no vote for request of development rights at 1725 Scribner Road. Those in favor, aye.
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 Opposed? It carries. And then again, Mr. Costello, if you would take some of those findings that Councilwoman Metzler had put together, we'll draft a letter. We'll see if we can get it to the board maybe over the next week. And then once we've all agreed, then we can get it out to the applicant.
Sounds good.
Okay, great. Very good. That takes us to informational items. And we have discussion. This was previously before the board. We asked it be held. This is something that Mr. Valentine and his team has been working on. And so with that, Mr. Valentine, tree preservation guidelines, if you will.
Thank you, sir.
And
This was something brought up by Councilwoman Metzler and the Conservation Board. We're not proposing any changes to the tree preservation policy. That's not what we're discussing this evening. Just how internally staff handles distributing the guidelines. How do we pass them on to developers, convey the conservation board's thoughts and concerns and applications to the planning board and to this board as well. So kind of drafted kind of our not a formal policy, but kind of the method that we follow when we look at sending these out, how we inform developers about it. I emailed this off yesterday. This is the same summary sheet that you got yesterday, but just kind of going through it. Obviously, first and foremost, if it's a woodland EPOD, the environmental protection overlay districts that the town has, if it falls in a woodland EPOD, we automatically send it out. We do obviously let the conservation board know when it is a wooded lot, inform them to go out and take a look at it. Some of the things we highlighted, and I talked about some of the projects we're looking at in some of the different areas. We do issue an EPOD permit, which requires a higher level of review. Have the conservation board go out and take a look at it. They'll issue a report. Sometimes there's some. We'll let them know if it's a, especially wooded lot in a sketch plan phase, but a lot of times until you get to more of a preliminary final, it's kind of hard to know what they're really proposing or what's going to come. Obviously, the application just before us never got any further than kind of just a thought concept. And then also, wanted to highlight, obviously there's a lot of disease going on currently with trees and everything else. The town itself is doing some tree removals at Shadow Pines, due to the Austrian pine, the blight over there, and with emerald ash borer. I know I've been driving up and down roads lately, and I've never seen as many dead trees, unfortunately, out there than we have right now. So sometimes there's issues with that, and then obviously, ultimately, the enforcement part of it is working with whichever board of jurisdiction, whether it be planning board or town board, your ultimate approval of the site. With recommendations of the guidelines and recommendations of the conservation board is kind of where enforcement comes in. So once the approved site plan is out there, that's what we kind of hold the developers to make sure that they stay within those guidelines that those boards have adopted and discussed. So that was kind of the general synopsis of kind of how we handle it. Don't know if
I
the
think it's
board's
very
thoughts and
helpful.
concerns. Wanted to talk to this board first. Ultimately, we will, if the board is comfortable with this approach and this avenue, we'll convey that back to the conservation board. I did recently attend a conservation board meeting. There was a few projects in particular they had some thoughts and concerns on. I sat with them, got some helpful feedback from them. What their concerns were as part of that. So. Would obviously convey that back to them just so they're clear on how we handle things, or if there's something in here that obviously this board has concerns with, we can adapt or revise as needed.
So Mark, I know that not every item goes to the conservation board, again, depending upon sensitivity, EPODs, some of those types of things. You note in your memo that for preliminary and final site plan approval, typically that's when you would have the applicant do a tree inventory, if you will, and not really at what we call a sketch plan or concept plan overall. Is there any benefit, at the sketch plan review of doing some level, especially if you have a lot that is heavily wooded? Is there any benefit of doing at least an initial tree inventory that might be reviewed with the conservation board at a concept or sketch plan?
We can have them do a visual assessment of kind of what's out there. Typically, until we get to preliminary and final, usually don't have surveyors on board, and
Right.
May not have a design professional to actually locate those, and they do measurements of the caliper of the tree and the exact location. But we can do more of kind of a visual assessment of what's out there, what kind of a stand of trees are there, is there anything of significant size and caliper to to look at it a little bit earlier on.
Well, I'm just thinking, especially in, in an area that might be more heavily wooded or in a tree pod, to get that discussion out early. And in some cases, it might help identify the fact that, you have a lot that has a lot of Austrian pines or, the ash trees that are having some problems, and that, there's a high likelihood that a lot of that could go away. I think the more information we have up front to have some of that dialogue, I think helps avoid down the road, if you have a situation where we think that this is going to develop this way, and then there's a little bit more, clear cutting of woodlots than what was either planned, anticipated, or engineered for. And it could be a lot of reasons. It could be a drainage-related issue. Obviously, we can't afford to have drainage problems, but I think some of that more early on review could be helpful and avoid, some concerns down the road. So just a thought. Okay, board questions on Mark's memo? Anything more we'd like to possibly see done for this?
I think that's the, pretty much the extent that can be done, given the fact that they're guidelines. And I know that the Conservation Board has had discussion in the past about this and wrestled with the fact that they are just guidelines, and really it's hard to have a whole lot of teeth in them, or, enforcement in terms of some sort of sanction against a developer or a landowner for violating what are just guidelines. But I think there's a lot here that can provide a lot of good input to accomplish what the guidelines are looking to accomplish.
Okay. Other questions, comments? Mark, Kaz, anything additional you think the board should be aware of on this particular item? So I think the next step is circle back, with the Conservation Board on that. I know you were at the last meeting, if memory serves me correct, and maybe for their upcoming meeting, I don't know if they've canceled their meeting for July, but between July and August, if we'd circle back with them and provide similar feedback so that they've got that, and if they have any additional questions, comments, so we'll use it as hopefully a learning, sharing, and communication tool back between the town board and conservation board. All right, so I would just entertain a motion, that Mark close that loop back with conservation board and address any questions, comments, additional comments they might have.
I will move for that.
All right. Mr. Moore?
I will second.
Okay, and Mark, if you would get that on the calendar at the appropriate time, that would be good. Seeing no further discussion, those in favor, aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, that carries. That brings us to the end of the agenda. We do have one matter under executive session for a legal real estate item, and so I would entertain a motion to adjourn this work session, and we'll go into executive session. So, motion to adjourn, Mr. Moore. Seconded
Second.
by Paula, and those in favor, aye.
Aye.
Okay, thank you, that carries. Our next work session meeting will be July 11th, 2018 at 7 p.m. in this room. And again, the board will be moving to a conference room for executive session on legal and real estate. Thank you very much. Meeting adjourned at 7:21 p.m. Thank you to PCTV. Thank you to staff and our robust audience.